Hello everyone, my name is Cynthia, and I'm 21 years old. I live in a small town in the countryside, and I would like to share my story with all of you. Before I begin, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have never believed in supernatural things, and I have always been quite skeptical. However, after a specific event, my perspective changed and I started experiencing things beyond what I could imagine. It all started when my mother and I spent months searching for a house to rent, until we finally found a true mansion. At the time, I was 16 years old and my eyes sparkled as I beheld that imposing two-story residence. Upon entering the living room, I came across a spiral staircase made of metal. Moving beyond the living room, there was a dining area, followed by the kitchen, and then a spacious and airy balcony. Climbing the stairs from the living room, we reached a space that separated two inside bedrooms, which were extremely spacious. The house was simply amazing, and the rent was surprisingly low. This circumstance aroused our suspicion. However, without much thought, we decided to move in almost immediately. The proximity to my grandmother's house was a determining factor, as my mother wanted to be nearby in case my grandmother needed any help. Now I will recount what happened in two separate episodes. The first one occurred approximately 10 days after our move. It was a Friday, and I was extremely annoyed because my mother didn't want to let me go out. So, of course, I was lying down sulking in my room when I received a message from my mother saying she was going to visit my grandmother's house, which was 2 streets away from ours. I didn't even reply, just to spite her. It was at that moment that, a few minutes later, I heard a loud bang coming from the living room, as if something was hitting the stairs downstairs, and the sound gradually increased all the way to the top. Thought to myself, my mom hasn't left yet, I'll go there and ask once again to go out with my friends. So, I got out of bed and went downstairs. I vividly remember, before taking the first turn on the spiral staircase, I saw my mom near the living room door, with her back turned as if she was about to open it. However, when I got downstairs, there was no one there. The doors were closed. I even went outside to the street, looked throughout the house, but my mom wasn't there. I went back up to my room, closed the door, and only went out again when I heard the living room door open and heard my mom's voice coming in. That day, I desperately searched for a logical explanation for what had happened. A few days after the staircase incident, another one occurred on the following Friday. This time, my mother allowed me to go out with my friends. I was excited, and earlier, I had stopped by a small shop and bought a lipstick. Even though it wasn't something I usually used, it matched the look I had chosen for the day. When I arrived home from work, I worked part-time because I studied in the morning. I left my bag on my bedroom vanity. I went to the bathroom, took my shower, and upon coming out, I started getting ready since we had planned to go out at 8 p.m. It was already around 7 p.m. when I went to the vanity and came across the shop bag where I had bought the lipstick outside my bag. The lipstick was inside the bag, opened, and the bullet of the lipstick was completely chewed up. I was perplexed and irritated at the same time, so I called my mom, who was as confused as I was. We didn't have an explanation for it. I took the lipstick, and the bite marks on it were clearly visible. My mom and I searched the house to see if there was any animal that could have caused it, but we didn't find anything with bite marks. Nevertheless, I decided to go out that night. However, I remember the feeling of coming back home around 11 p.m. and sensing a heavy atmosphere, which led me to fall asleep with a strange sensation. On the same weekend as the lipstick incident, during Sunday afternoon, I was peacefully lying in my room when I heard screaming. The shouts were coming from the outside balcony, and my mother was involved. I rushed downstairs as the intensity of the screams worried me. When I got there, my mother blurted out, "Are you going crazy, girl? Why are you calling me like that? Did you really need to scream?" I was already coming up. Without understanding anything, I replied, "You're the one going crazy, Mom. You're the one screaming like a madwoman." I ran, thinking something terrible was happening. We stared at each other for a few seconds, and then realized that neither of us was lying. I was scared, and my mother, being more skeptical than me, simply attributed the confusion to some neighbors shouting. However, I clearly heard my name being called and recognized my mother's voice. Something told me that even she didn't truly believe the neighbor's story. It took me a while to fall asleep that night. I was afraid of seeing, hearing, or even dreaming of something disturbing. I knew something was wrong there. From that Sunday on, my life turned into a true nightmare. I would catch glimpses of figures and hear strange sounds almost every day. I wasn't sure if all of this was just in my mind, if I was projecting these experiences, or if it was actually happening. Nevertheless, it started affecting me intensely. I developed severe anxiety and began having panic attacks. Still, I didn't tell anyone out of fear of being judged or labeled as crazy. And things only worsened over time. The unbearable situation occurred approximately a month after we moved into the house, although I can't recall the exact date. I was lying in the living room, watching TV, when I heard a strange noise coming from upstairs, specifically from my room. Even though my memory is blurry, I remember lying in the living room, engrossed in the TV screen, when I noticed footsteps echoing from upstairs, where my room was located directly above the living room. Shortly after, I heard a sudden sound as if something heavy had been thrown onto the floor. Alone in the house, I felt immobilized by fear, unable to move. Every little noise seemed to inject a surge of adrenaline into me. However, after a few minutes, I mustered up the courage and decided to climb the stairs. As I ascended, I caught a glimpse of my room with the door slightly ajar. What I witnessed in that moment still haunts my nightmares to this day. I have terrible memories of that day. With my own eyes, I saw 2 feet as if someone was lying on the floor of my room. However, from where I stood at the beginning of the staircase, I could only see the feet. I knew it wasn't my mother present, but for some inexplicable reason, I imagined it could be someone injured. Even though I was fully aware that it was impossible for someone to have entered my house, I firmly believed that there was someone there. Fearfully, I approached cautiously. When I peeked my head into the room, I was faced with a woman lying face down, wearing an old, dirty, and slightly torn dress. Her long, dark blonde hair covered her face. The idea of getting closer arose, but suddenly, I heard a thud coming from my own room. It was a sound I had heard before, the sound of a gunshot. My heart almost stopped. I collapsed to the ground, started screaming, and covered my face. The terror was so great that I lost control and wet my clothes. After a few minutes, still trembling with fear, I gathered the courage to uncover my face. The woman in front of me, her blonde hair stained with blood, lay in a pool that had formed beneath her. In an impulse, I quickly got up and ran out of that house, stumbling along the way. I headed straight to my grandmother's house. When I arrived there, I didn't know whether to cry or to tell what had happened, but as soon as I mentioned the words gun and blood, my grandmother immediately called the police. The police arrived and entered my house, while my grandmother, my mother, and the entire neighborhood waited outside. I remember the furious expression on the policeman's face when, according to him, nothing was found inside. Upon hearing those words, I rushed upstairs, unable to believe what was being said. When I reached my room, I found absolutely nothing there. I cried once again, unable to comprehend why this was happening to me. After that incident, I was stigmatized as someone unstable. Since that fateful day, I never had the courage to set foot in that house again. I moved in with my grandmother, and my mother carefully brought my belongings to me. She was the only person who didn't judge me, although she avoided talking about the subject. She accompanied me to appointments with a psychologist and sought help for herself as well. I have a feeling that she also witnessed the inexplicable in that house, but she still resides there alone, while I fervently searched for a new home for both of us. During the period when my mother remained alone in that house, she acted peculiarly towards me and my grandmother. At first, I thought it was due to my sudden departure. However, I soon realized there was something deeper. It was late at night, about 10 days after I had left, when I was almost falling asleep, that I heard my mother calling at the door. I got up and opened it, finding her with a frightened expression, saying that we needed to find another house and that she refused to go back there. I tried to insist that she tell me what had happened, but she remained silent. To this day, I am unaware of the details of that night, but it was enough to turn my mother into an incredibly skeptical person. She fled from that house in the middle of the night. We returned the property to the owner, who was perplexed that no one wanted to live there. The house was magnificent, and he had reduced the price several times. Without beating around the bush, my mother declared that as long as that house remained haunted, no one would dare to enter. We rented another residence, this time just one street below my grandmother's house. The truth came to light in the week we were already settled in the new house. At my workplace, a colleague who still sits next to me today approached to talk to me. She mentioned that she had heard the reason why my mother and I left the house and wanted to share her belief with me. She said we were not the first ones to leave the residence for that reason. Surprisingly, she lived at the end of the street of that cursed house. Although I felt some discontent that she had never mentioned anything while I was living there, I acknowledged her kindness and thanked her, saying that I had already overcome that past. However, she persisted and revealed that many years ago, when she was my age, a woman was found dead in the room, with a gunshot to the head. At the time, they claimed she had taken her own life, but the whole town knew it was her husband who had murdered her. The woman was incredibly beautiful. This revelation sent chills down my spine, and my fear returned, now mixed with sadness. I was certain that the woman I had seen was exactly that same woman. In my room, it was her. After a few days, that same coworker brought an old newspaper. In those pages, there was a photo of the woman, and it was undeniably the same person. She was truly beautiful, and in the picture, she was wearing a lipstick of the same shade that I had bought. At that moment, my feeling of sadness overcame the fear. I believe I understood that whatever was in that house, somehow, wanted help.